Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collab 101's module on facilitating shared power, an introduction to the standard meeting practice. My name is Cecile Green, co-founder of Round Sky Solutions and developer of Collab, and I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues Charlotte Root, Rebecca Fisher-McGinty, and Daniel Little. In this training, we'll be covering some big picture questions around how to share power, including the purpose of core roles on a team, one of which is the facilitator. And the facilitator's role in taking the team through the standard meeting practice. We'll go into detail into the standard meeting practice, so you'll be able to try it on your own. And we'll take some time for facilitation tips and tricks before we end with a Q&A. So if you've not already watched the Intro to Collab presentation, you should do so because it covers some of the terms and concepts we'll be using in this training. And during this training, I'll be referring occasionally to the cards, the Collab cards, in particular the purple facilitator card, and it may be helpful to pause the video briefly to review the card. As we get rolling here, I wanted to start big on one of the key principles for sustainably sharing power. Essentially, make the use of power explicit in defined areas of autonomy and evolve it as needed in order to stay requisite or in alignment with where your team is at. The reason to do this is when a team or organization has a reliable process for defining and evolving areas of autonomous power, it gains clarity, agility, and efficiency. We'll be discussing concrete mechanisms for doing this in both today's facilitator training and in the core roles training. So as I mentioned, core roles are one of these concrete mechanisms, and one of which is the facilitator, and they really represent the basic leadership and management functions of any team. They exist alongside all the other roles in a team, ones that the team uniquely creates for itself. In other words, in order to function effectively as a team, there are fundamental leadership functions that must be enacted, such as priority setting, accountability, record keeping, meeting facilitation, hiring, firing, performance evaluation, metrics tracking, resource allocation, and the surfacing and processing of tensions. These are all basic functions which are required in order for a team to work well together. In a conventional management setting, these leadership functions are really conflated into one role, the manager, who's really expected to do all of the above. In post-conventional teams, what often happens is that teams assume that they can operate without any of these functions explicitly defined. And both approaches lead to dysfunction of one kind or another. Collab's answer to this dilemma is a set of core roles that define all the basic leadership functions, but enable a team to distribute those functions by electing people to fill those roles and rotating those roles on a regular basis once people are trained. So here's a little more detail on the core roles. Each core role holds different parts of the leadership functions, as I mentioned, and you can check out all the details on the purple role cards. The scope lead is accountable for keeping an eye on strategy, really our priorities, and is the default role for managing, hiring, and firing. The scope rep looks out for the support and resourcing needs of the team and represents those in other scopes. The facilitator moves the team efficiently and effectively through the steps of the meeting processes, including decision-making. And the scribe records the outputs and is the keeper of records. Metrics looks out for what data is needed to help us stay on track and make sure it's getting tracked and reported on regularly. And the scope member is the default role that we all take on in order to perform work in any scope with the very foundational accountabilities like attending meetings, reporting on progress, making team decisions, and tracking tasks. And last but not least, the crosslink is only needed occasionally, and it provides the linking function between scopes as needed. Today, we're focused on the role of the facilitator in Collab, but I wanted to briefly review the other roles and their purpose so you can see the team of core roles that the facilitator plays with. We'll be discussing the role or the job of the facilitator in detail in just a few minutes, but I wanted to start by looking at what leadership function facilitation fills by asking each of you, what have you seen happen in groups without a facilitator?
Yeah, I have definitely experienced this many times. And one thing that really stands out is that people in the group don't understand the direction of the meeting, or the reason of the group feels unclear, and that people are worried about stepping on other people's toes.
Yeah, I resonate with that. Thanks, Rebecca. How about you, Charlotte?
Yeah, I've experienced a lot of conversations just falling apart in teams into repetitive and not useful talk.
Yeah.
They can even, lead to backslides, especially they can be usually dominated by the loudest and, the most powerful in their implicit power roles in their lives, which can be a problem for lots of teens.
Thank you, Charlotte. How about you, Daniel?
Yeah, kind of similar. I really thought that without a facilitator, it's really common for teams to fall into more open conflict, or if it's not open conflict, kind of this implicit like jockeying for power and influence, and it just slows everything down. It feels awful. It doesn't really work.
Yeah, wow. I really resonate with all of those and have experienced them myself. And part of those, those experiences really inspired the synthesis that Collab provides. And the role of the facilitator is really critical in increasing our capacity to self-organize. It also enables the use of participatory process because we can define a process that the facilitator then uses, which is participatory in nature, rather than just kind of allowing whatever might organically arise in terms of group conversation. And this means that we can share power more reliably, and it also makes conversations much, much more efficient and honestly more fun. So Collab as a set of communication processes for self-organizing teams is founded on the use of healthy power across the team. And as the facilitator, you are filling one of the roles accountable for leading the team through the processes in order to share power effectively. It's important that you remember as a facilitator, you're really not alone. There are other core roles, such as the scribe and the scope lead and scope rep and metrics that work with you during meetings. So as we take a look at the role of facilitator, I'm curious what each of you have seen facilitators do that really worked well. How about you, Daniel?
One of the things is really making space for a kind of vital listening and sharing of each other's perspectives so that we can really include everyone in a way that's meaningful.
Thank you, Daniel. How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that there's a key part of tuning in to what your team needs to move something forward, and sometimes just to clarify what the decisions have been made.
Yeah, that's a good one. Charlotte?
Yeah, so in my experience, the facilitator has a really important job of holding the process for the team, which really increases everyone's comfort in the discussion, and also listening for the state of the team members and the group as a whole. A shift in state can lead to really negative or really positive results based on how it's facilitated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I guess I would just add in summary that as a facilitator, your role is really about helping the individuals fill their role as sensors for the organization, meaning their capacity to see what's needed and represent that. And they do that by kind of making clear what part of the meeting process we are in and soliciting input for that segment. The facilitator kind of works the team through the process of synthesizing, focusing, redirecting all the perspectives on a team, including the conflicting ones. And to do this more easily, Collab provides meeting templates that step by step give you the tools to do that synthesizing, focusing, and redirecting as the facilitator. So let's review the role of the facilitator in detail. In particular, setting up the meeting space, including a virtual one with the living agenda, with all the necessary accoutrements, boards, pens, internet, chairs, and so on, whatever it requires. The living agenda is really a simple Google Doc template that you can find in the course platform, and there's further introduction to it in the scribe training. As a facilitator, you hold the power to move the scope through the steps of the various meeting practices in a timely and effective manner, which means in addition to the steps of the processes, you are keeping time or getting support to do that. It's a lot, but as facilitator, you get to kind of ask for that extra help if you want it. Also, passing facilitation off to another trained facilitator if one would like to. For example, if it's your item and you don't want to have to facilitate your own item, although you can, or if it's being asked by another scope member due to being sufficiently involved in the content of an agenda item. As facilitator, you're also ascertaining the optimal flow of agenda items through the meeting. This means that you are in charge of choosing which agenda item comes first, second, third, so on. Also training new scope members in Collab, and training all scope members in the facilitator role, with the goal being that we want everyone trained as facilitator. This helps in a lot of ways, including everyone really understands much more thoroughly what the steps of the process is if they've had to facilitate. In addition, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to highlight a few of the key ways in which Collab approaches facilitation differently than many other approaches to facilitation. In particular, Collab has both an explicit position on power and concrete mechanisms for reliably delivering healthy power in action. So this means that the processes that we've constructed are explicitly collaborative and cooperative in nature. We've synthesized a facilitation process that reliably and transparently cultivates healthy power. And many facilitation methodologies have either nothing to say about power, leaving the existing dynamics in place, or try to address it by calling power dynamics out, but offering no clear, consistent, and neutral means of getting people to concretely and consistently shift the dynamics to ones that are working better. There are a lot of ways that this is embedded in Collab, but for the facilitators in particular, here are some of those mechanisms, which we'll explain in greater detail shortly. First of all, facilitating within the given process, the process the team has agreed to, and making judgment calls on the process as they arise, having been given that authority by being elected. Also, returning power to the tension holder during agenda processing, and distinguishing outputs using the effective process to get there. Furthermore, the facilitator helps with clarifying authority between roles as needed. So on the surface, the role of the facilitator isn't complicated, but the devil is in the details. For any of us who facilitated, we know it's a really hard job, actually. So let's dig into the details of the standard meeting practice, which is one of the first meeting practices we recommend you learn. This is the standard meeting practice flowchart, and really it's the backbone or the core process upon which all the other processes in Collab are built and used. The other processes, just for reference, are purpose, business model, strategy, interpersonal, and personal development. And those can all be found on the cards. And in our level 1 Collab certification program, we go into detail on each of those other processes. For today, we're going to focus on the standard meeting practice. It's the key flow to learn and be able to use and adapt in various situations. So let's go over each of these segments, including their rationale. And for more detailed instructions, please refer to the cards and the instructional. But Rebecca, would you be willing to get us rolling with an introduction to admin?
In your standard meeting practice, you always start with admin. And during admin, you have the chance to clarify who the facilitator is, who the scribe will be, and introduce any special guests that don't usually join you for that meeting. And this time is intended to address any meeting-related details, including the timing of the end of the meeting, and anything that might be distracting during the meeting, such as faulty internet, background noise, etc.
Thanks, Rebecca. How about check-ins, Daniel?
Yeah, check-ins are a time for everyone to really fully arrive and get present for the meeting. There are also little opportunities to build the kind of interpersonal relating on the team and build a deeper understanding of each other as people. At its most basic, it's a verbal signal that we're present, we're ready to go, or to share anything that may be in the way of our participation. If there's time and interest, some teams find a lot of value in more personal questions and responses to really use that as a way to know each other more deeply. Some possible questions for the check-in could be, is there anything in the way of your being fully present in the meeting today? Or how are you feeling physically or emotionally? Or what's one interesting thing that stands out from your time getting to work today?
Okay, next up is ops reports. And ops reports are a really critical time to get in sync with each other, to provide a chance for each of us to report on what we've been doing and what we intend to do going forward. Also, our recurring tasks and any metrics that we might have to report. The idea behind ops reports is to keep it short, sweet, snappy, and to save discussion for the agenda. And this is a tricky thing as facilitator, to distinguish when an item that has some discussion to it really needs to go on the agenda. But the basic format is that you're going to invite each person to report, and then you'll pause at the end of their report for questions, comments, and appreciations. When we're done with ops reports, we then move into agenda building and processing.
In the agenda building phase, the facilitator checks in with each person that's present at the meeting to introduce the agenda items that they've already added to the agenda, and just to check in with them to see if there are any other things that are popping up for them on their minds in relation to the work that that scope is doing. And then they give a 10-second intro to that agenda item. And there may be really brief questions from other individuals about what that agenda item means or how long it will take. And then usually you do a little voting process and you go right into picking agenda items to process with the team. So that's the agenda processing section of the meeting. And that's when you really break things down and figure out how to work towards solutions with the whole team.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, we're gonna, in just a minute, we're gonna talk much more in detail about how to process agenda items, because that's where things get really interesting usually. But we wanted to go through the full flow of the standard meeting practice first. So Rebecca, will you take us into wrap?
Sure. After the agenda processing, the meeting is almost over, and you want to capture the key outputs from the meeting, which will be sent out by the scribe if your team needs that. And then you'll also take note of when the next meeting will be, if that's relevant.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think I would just simply add that it's generally helpful to think about ending your agenda processing about 10 minutes ahead of the scheduled end of the meeting. Sometimes it can be done in 5 minutes, but usually not less. And so give yourself 10 minutes to move before you move into wrap, and then flow into close. And Daniel, would you give us just a few thoughts about close?
Sure, that's just a time for everyone to have a quick round where everyone can offer their thoughts about the meeting and just any final words or final comments. Often the question is, how was that meeting for you? Something like that.
Nice and sweet and simple can work. Thanks, everyone. Now that we've kind of covered the overview of the standard meeting practice, let's take some time to dig into the details of agenda processing. During a meeting, agenda items are surfaced and then processed. It is your job as facilitator to pick the order, so you get to decide what comes first, second, and so on. But the key of effective and efficient processing is to sort the tensions once you know enough about them into what kind of output will move attention forward. So agenda items follow a very simple flow, overarching flow, which is pick the item, you get an introduction from the tension holder about that item, you identify which track that tension will need to follow in order to move their tension forward. You choose the process that relates to that track, and you produce an output. The agenda item is complete when that output moves attention forward for the tension holder, and it's recorded on the agenda by the scribe. That's when you know you're done, and you shouldn't move on to the next item until you have that concrete output that moves attention forward. So let's talk about a little bit about each of these tracks. Collab uses a sorting mechanism of pattern, project, and person as a shortcut to identify what kind of output, which then translates into what kind of process to use. To help you with your sorting, you can check out the block on each of the blue cards in the Collab card deck to see some concrete examples of tensions that fall into that particular type of conversation. On that note, Daniel, will you talk a little bit about pattern? What is pattern and what kind of outputs do we get from that?
Sure, yeah. Patterns are outputs that are the creation of ongoing agreements that the team is going to use over a longer period of time. In other words, it's going to be agreements about how are things done around here, or what are our shared intentions. In Collab, the conversations on purpose, business model, strategy, and governance are all pattern outputs. And we use integrative consent to be sure that we are all aligned in these decisions, which is the decision-making process for making sure that everyone's wrapped in and that there's no real harm that's going to be caused by adopting that particular pattern.
Thanks, Daniel. And I would just add that each of those conversations, governance, for example, has a different format for the roles and accountabilities compared to policies, and that's different than strategy. So do check out each of the cards in the deck for specific examples and formats that you can use to produce clear outputs. Rebecca, how about the project track?
Great, yeah. The project track is an operations conversation, and often it comes out with a next action or next project that has a clear beginning and ending, which is different than a pattern, which is an ongoing process. And usually discussed through open discussion, and no integrative consent is needed for this because it's a one project, one next action type of output.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. The other reason we don't really need integrative consent for the project track is that typically we have already defined in our governance conversations, which is one of the pattern conversations, we've already defined what the roles are. And so we know which project something should go to. So for example, we might have a role of web page manager, and out of a particular agenda item, we might have the project of front page of website to be updated. Well, that project would automatically go to the web page manager. So we don't need to solicit volunteers or figure out who's going to put it on their already overloaded plate. We already know. It goes to the web page manager, and they then get to sort according to priorities what they're going to put their time into. And Charlotte, how about the person track?
Yeah, so a person tension is something that's related to the interpersonal feel that happens amongst the members of the team, or the personal development of an individual team member. So this is something that comes up that might help. It might be an opportunity to help build better relationships between people, or the additional skills that might help any of the team members do their job better, or generally have more capacity in their role in that scope.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And each of those, the interpersonal and the personal development, have their own set of practices, which you can check out on the cards. The interpersonal, the basic ideas are restoring relationship, usually around an emotionally charged item. And the personal development is around how we support each other with our own unique movement forward. So thanks, everyone. That's a really brief introduction to the standard meeting practice. And we encourage you to go and try it out, because there's a lot that you'll learn through trial and error. And you may find it helpful to check out additional training material in the course platform for implementing and especially how to get started with the standard meeting practice with your team. So let's take a few minutes now and go over some facilitation tips and tricks. In this particular segment of our conversation today, we want to just sort of dig into some of the key points that really make a difference for us as facilitators. First of all, follow the provided format until attention drives the need to add, delete, or change the meeting format. Then take proposals for those changes to the standard meeting practice. The point of this is to enable your whole team to consent on the process that you're using for making decisions, for meeting, for being accountable to each other. So the standard meeting practice provides a template. Start with that, follow it, and don't change it unless there's really a tension that is driving the need to do so. Let me give you an example. Here at Round Sky, we started with the standard meeting practice, but we had a tension come up at some point that we needed to add a new segment to our ops reports around leads. And so we took that through the standard meeting practice, and we added that as a new segment to the operations or the ops report part of our meeting. Another really important point is to remember to follow the process yourself as a participant. Pass off facilitation to another trained facilitator if you're asked to do so, or if you feel really you could use the headspace to focus on what you're saying. But the key thing is that you really are demonstrating what the other participants are expected to do. So remembering to follow it yourself is really important. And if you're training new people, be sure to explain the steps to new people as needed to help people stay on track. Otherwise, they can kind of get a little lost, or they can provide input where it's not being asked. And so those introductions are really, really key. Remember that open discussion is the time for crosstalk. And as a facilitator, don't allow crosstalk when it's not time for it, which is really any time there is a round or attention holder only part of the meeting. Also redirect that input that doesn't belong in that segment of the meeting to the appropriate part of the meeting. For example, if you're in ops reports and someone wants to get into a discussion around a project that someone's holding, it looks like it's gonna take less than like 15 seconds. As facilitator, you wanna say, hey, that's great, thank you so much. Let's put that on the agenda for further discussion. So keep things to the appropriate part of the meeting. This will help you get much more efficient and frankly, more productive. Also, pay special attention to the quality of conversation during agenda processing. If it seems to be diverging into related topics, bring it back to the one at hand. And you can also call out separate tensions. One of the key supporting pieces of how Collab works is that you want to process one tension at a time. And you don't move on to the next one until you're done with the one you've got. Sometimes as you're processing a tension, another one emerges. That's normal and natural. As facilitator, you want to call that out and you want to get that put on the agenda as a separate tension with its tension holder. Another key point is when dealing with a list of mixed tensions, keep in mind that it's fine to start with whatever tension someone's bringing to the meeting, but as facilitator, you need to help identify whether that tension relates to a pattern, a project, or a person, and funnel that tension to the correct meeting process. This really means that people don't have to be clear when they're putting a tension up. They don't have to know exactly what the output's going to be to move their tension forward. Trust the process, but as facilitator, your really key role in funneling that conversation into the right track so that you can be efficient and collaborative together. As I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, address one tension at a time, super important. Keep an eye out for tension creep or tensions morphing into another, and put them on the agenda for processing later. And as you're wrapping up an agenda item, it's really important to check with your scribe to be sure that they've recorded the outputs appropriately. And likewise, if you're the scribe, make sure the facilitator isn't moving too fast and request that they slow down and allow you to catch up. So that you can record those outputs because they are a key component of your collaborative system. During integrative consent, there's an integration round, and this can often be tricky for facilitators. So there's one really key idea to keep in mind, which is to try asking, will this proposal cause harm, or can we try it and revisit it later when we have more data? Basically, you're asking, is it workable to try? If not, how can we make it workable to try? And this is a really different way of relating to decisions being made. And we'll go into greater detail in integrative consent training video on this, so do check that out. Okay, I'm ready to hear from the rest of you. What other tips, tricks have you found particularly helpful as facilitators?
You know, the most important thing that I've noticed is to, like you said, always introduce the process, especially when you have new people in your meeting. Just, you know, hold them in a space that they're comfortable, which is so important to making the meeting easy for everyone involved by introducing the process that you're going to, you know, with just 10 seconds, the title of the process that you're going into, and that just makes it much easier for everyone to remain engaged and comfortable.
Yeah, I've seen that derail a team more than once, so thanks, Charlotte. Rebecca, how about you?
Yeah, I think that the facilitator and the scribe working closely together is really important. And the facilitator should always check with the scribe before moving on to the next item, like you said, but also calling out any outputs that they see and asking for help in organizing the agenda, as well as the scribe can communicate with the facilitator and the team to ensure that everything that's needed is recorded and that it is written down appropriately.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, the scribe and facilitator are really co-leaders of a meeting. It's easy to kind of see the facilitator because they're holding a role where they're more visible. But those two really working closely together produce the best meetings. How about you, Daniel?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on just the being the facilitator, being grounded, present, and personable. There's just a huge component of facilitating, of course, which is what the facilitator brings as a person to the room. And it's really helpful as facilitator to bring your own sense of strength and confidence. It's perhaps paradoxical. Bringing your strength helps you relax and be able to listen better. It helps you guide the process more deftly, helps you be trusted by the group that they're in good hands. And a couple of things to remember about that, like get in your body. For myself, I like to feel my feet in contact with the floor and feel like a sense of support from the ground up. Or smile. Neuroscience, right? Like brain, the smiling is wired into this social circuitry of the brain in a way that just helps everybody just feel relaxed, more comfortable, more at ease, able to think more clearly. And making eye contact is similar. When we make eye contact with each other and with that sense of friendly presence, it helps everyone stay in tune and align with each other, particularly between the facilitator and the attention holder. To know, so you can, as facilitator, be really sensitive to is their attention moving forward? Is it progressing? By staying tuned into how it's going for them.
Thank you, Daniel. That's such an important piece, and I think I would just add to that we can get better at those somatic embodiment pieces through practice. So any opportunity you have as a facilitator to practice with the awareness you're bringing to your own body and presence will increase your capacity over time. So just a couple more thoughts about what enhances and provides shortcuts as a facilitator during the meeting. And one of those is to have team members enter their agenda items ahead of time. This saves time during the meeting. And that's often something people have to take a little time to get used to. So it's fine at the beginning if that's not what's happening, but that's a learning piece to introduce at some point. Also, before entering wrap, this is a really interesting shortcut to review the agenda items for any agenda items that can be moved forward quickly with next actions. Even if that doesn't fully address the item, identifying a next action to incrementally move their agenda item forward can produce much more movement overall for a team. So just before wrap, scan the agenda. You can ask your other teammates, are any of these items that we could move forward super quickly with a quick next action? And sometimes agenda items have already been addressed through another item and can be identified as being crossed off or completed. Another quick tip is to remember that you can employ popcorn-style questions and comments during the during questions and comments and during the objection round. So popcorn style is when people just say if they have something to say, they can speak that, as opposed to a round where you're going one person at a time. And typically questions and comments are best done as a round, mostly because it really gets everyone engaged. So really important. Rounds are a very powerful means of engagement. But sometimes it's really not needed. And as facilitator, it's at your discretion, and popcorn style can be a little quicker. The main thing is I wouldn't use popcorn style if it's an item that is likely to need more input from your teammates. And if the output is going to be a new shared agreement, as you're digging into that item for a new agenda item, ask the tension holder if they have a proposal versus inviting them to do open discussion. So we go into detail on integrative consent in the integrative consent training, but this is a really important shortcut because open discussion typically takes longer, and sometimes that is the perfect way to go. Other times it's really not needed, and the tension holder could and does come to the meeting with an idea in their mind of what could move their tension forward. And that will make your team more efficient if they're willing to put their proposal forward, and you can always invite them. Ask them if they have something. Okay, well, we are ready for our questions, and let's start with you, Charlotte.
I've always struggled. It seems like sometimes when I pick a process to move the person's tension forward and we go all the way through it and they just aren't sure if that really moved their tension forward all the way, what do you do if the process that you have gone through doesn't move that person's tension forward all the way?
Great question. The main thing to keep in mind is that we are not trying to fully solve someone's tension. We are looking to incrementally move it forward for them. So it's not our job as a facilitator or as a team member to fully satisfy someone. We're looking for incremental movement forward. And it's really important to remind people of that because we can kind of get stuck on wanting to have the full answer right now. But that's really actually undermining of team movement and efficiency. And so part of what we have to learn in Collab is how to embrace incremental movement forward and trust that the process will work over time to provide a full resolution to your tension.
Thank you.
How about you, Daniel?
Yeah, there's this thing that happens in meetings where, where we're talking about one thing, you mentioned this a little bit, but there's this sense of, some other thing is we're talking about something and some ideas coming to mind. And I realize there's something really important that I haven't, dealt with. What do we do with these tensions that arise right in the middle of the meeting after we've already kind of built the agenda?
Truth is the agenda is always open. And because it's a Google Doc, everyone can add to it. And so the basic movement is to, as facilitator, to pay keen attention to when you can sense that something else is emerging that's not the same tension as the one you're on. And to call that out and have your scribe put it up or have the tension holder add it to the agenda themselves.
Thanks, cool.
How about you, Rebecca?
This is a lot of information and could be a huge shift for teams. How do you get into the flow while using Collab?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to point out that there are additional training materials on the course platform that get into how to get started. And it's true, this is a lot of information. It can be a little overwhelming. And the main thing to keep in mind here is to keep practicing and that over time, this will be integrated. Collab is really cool because you learn by doing. The downside to that is that it can be a little extra awkward and chaotic to get started because there are these various kind of structures to learn and terms to learn and ways of being to learn and roles to integrate. But the actuality is that through practice, this is quite easily integrated. And in our experience, we find that, within like 5-6 repetitions of the standard meeting practice, people are getting the idea, they're getting the flow. And part of that is that because the standard meeting practice is simply some of the best practices available out there for how to conduct a meeting efficiently and how to do that collaboratively. So many of us have experienced these types of meeting segments in other places. And so we're kind of just blending it together in a new way. Did that answer your question, Rebecca?
That did, thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions or comments before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I have one. Some teams are really well, really prepared to come together in a meeting process and talk through tensions until they find a solution. But some teams, it just doesn't seem like they have the same idea about where things are headed. They might have a bunch of different personal agendas. So how do you bring them all together in one meeting practice?
It's another great question. Thank you, Charlotte. So the key thing I would offer here is that try trying the standard meeting practice as an experiment for your team, and as a mechanism to align all of these different personal agendas, is a very powerful way of getting used to a new way of doing things that is much more aligning than simply having different personal agendas shooting off in a variety of directions, which honestly can be discouraging and inefficient. And so as a facilitator introducing this new process, it's really important to ask your team's permission to try an experiment and to tell them why you think it's a good idea. And usually that why is based in some of the challenges you're having currently with your team that you would like to surmount, that you see this as a better way of moving forward to align those differences. And yeah, so anything you would add to that, Charlotte?
That sounds like a really good way to start, just to ask them if it's okay to try this as an experiment to help people get aligned. For me, going through the purpose process is super aligning. So I think any team that goes through that process, with the use of a facilitator would feel the difference.
Yep. And I could say that for the other meeting practices as well, the business model and strategy and interpersonal and personal development. Practicing these over time is in itself aligning and clarifying of different types of conflicts between people. For example, if we're not really clear about who is doing what on a team, we don't know what roles each of us is holding, that's a breeding ground for conflict. And going through and clarifying what your roles are is inherently aligning, and really does that in a very neutral, supportive way. So it's kind of exciting, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your attention and time, your contributions, your participation. And I just want to wrap us up by saying that there are further trainings on the course platform, including integrative consent, as we mentioned, the scribe training, which gets into some of the tracking docs that are really important. And please feel free to reach out with any questions. We're delighted to have you with us. Thanks so much. Bye.